Welcome, everybody, to another brand new episode of It's My Wrestling Podcast. I'm, of course, as always, your host, Chris Dees. Before I get started, as always, please hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Please hit follow if you're listening on audio platforms. Today's guest is a man I'm incredibly excited to speak to, and I always put a lot of effort into my intros. You guys know that. And I was looking down his list of accomplishments, and there are just far too many. He has basically won everything that there is to win in the NWA, WCW, AWA, WWF. All I'm going to say is he is a WWE Hall of Famer, one of the all-time greats. He is the living legend. Of course, it's Mr. Larry Zbyszko. Larry, thank you so much for joining me. It is an honor. How are you?
Well, that was a great intro, Chris. Thank you very much. I'm here in Orlando, Florida, Larry Land, and everything's going great. I can't complain. I'm trying to enjoy the golden years, and I've been lucky. God, I've been so lucky. I don't need artificial parts. Nothing hurts. I mean, God, I see some of the guys I've known that are still living, even younger than me, but they got artificial knees and artificial surgeries and back surgeries and neck surgeries. And I feel great. So I've been lucky, and I'm not pushing my luck. So a little golf here and there, and that's about it.
That's good. That's good to hear. Especially this year, we've lost a lot of legends, haven't we? We've lost a lot of the all-time greats this year. Probably a lot of the guys that you wrestled with, like Orndorff and people like that.
Yeah, Paul Orndorff. I mean, Joe the Animal was 61. And Butch Reed, and if I think about it, there's probably some more.
Bobby Eaton died a few months ago.
Yeah, Bobby Eaton.
Yeah, so many. It's been a terrible year.
I heard some guy, Angela Mosca, I think died the other day or something, and he was like 84 maybe. I knew him when I first started, but he was kind of finishing up when I started. But big guy too. I think he was a Canadian guy.
I saw the news come up, but I wasn't familiar with him.
Yeah,
not familiar.
I knew a little bit, but yeah, we don't last forever. We're here in a temporary vehicle called the body.
Yeah.
To experience life on this beautiful living planet, over which, between the sun and the earth, we have no control over the climate. We're just here to enjoy it. So.
Yeah, and you've lived one hell of a life, and I want to touch upon a lot of that now. So the first thing that I wanted to ask you, and this has always been something that I've been interested in, your name, your ring name, because obviously Larry Zbyszko is not your real name, just like most wrestlers go under a pseudonym or an alias or a moniker. And I know that your name was a tribute to a Polish-American wrestler from back in the 20s, Stanislaus. Where did the inspiration come from to do that? Was that somebody that you knew or had connections with, or?
Well, you know what? Actually, I didn't know it at the time. I was young and working out with Bruno, my mentor. He was helping me out. And Zbyszko was a famous, Polish wrestling name in the 20s and 30s and 40s, whatever. And there was two brothers, Vladik and Stanislaus. And Zbyszko wasn't their real name either.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I'm not sure exactly what it means in Polish. It might have something to do with the big one or the strong one or something like that. Mm-hmm. But Bruno's the one that said, well, we'll make your name Larry Zbyszko. Because in those days, back in the 70s, people would come up to me and go, hey, is Stanislaus Zbyszko your grandfather? I mean, it was still a well-known name to the wrestling fans in those days. So that's how that popped up. That was Bruno's idea. So I did it.
Fair enough. I had no idea. When I read about it, I saw that it came up. There wasn't really any context, but it was a great name. So Bruno was obviously a very clever man. It suits you. It's a name that just sort of fit you very naturally.
Yeah, and in the day, it was recognized by a lot of fans because it was a famous name, back in the good old days. And so I took it. The hardest part was when you look at it, ZBYSC, it looks like an eye chart. I always wish I had a shorter name because you do a lot of these autograph conventions and
Yeah, signing it. Yeah.
I just wrote stink, versus EBYSEKO. But it worked out good for me. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was, like I say, it was an inspired choice by Bruno. Speaking of Bruno, obviously, I think for everything that you've ever done in your career, which spanned many decades, God, like 5-6 decades, of a long time you were wrestling for. I think you are most probably fondly remembered for your time with Bruno, both as with him as your mentor, and then obviously your legendary feud and rivalry with him. What I'm curious to know about, though, is obviously you turned heel on him in, I think it was 1980, when you attacked him with the chair, left him in a pool of blood. Fans did not appreciate that. Fans were sort of like, they wanted your head on a block, didn't they? They were angry. Like, obviously, in this day and age, we know things aren't real in wrestling. That's all been ruined for us through social media.
It's been ruined.
But back in the day, people thought this was real. They thought that you had really turned on him, that you hated him, that you were trying to end his career. Like, did any of that reaction you got from fans ever make you want to stop wrestling because they attacked your cars, they flipped over taxis that you were in,
well,
you got stabbed?
Yeah, I got stabbed. I got shot at. People tried to run me off the road. I stuck a gun out the window at them. They took off. I mean, back in those days, 60s and the 70s and even the early 80s, you had a different audience, and people believed. And some people didn't, but the wrestling fans, they believed and they were emotionally involved. And when it came to Bruno, he was basically the most truly beloved wrestler ever. I mean, the fans loved him. And when Bruno, if he was in a match with 300-pound George Steele or Ivan Koloff or Killer Kowalski, and Bruno was bleeding and fell down to the mat, people in the audience got heart attacks, and some died. I mean,
wow,
it was a completely different world. And when I did the thing I did, and the way we did it, no one saw it coming. In fact, I think that was Vince McMahon made a quote once. It was the feud no one ever saw coming.
Yeah.
But it took people like a couple of days to get over the shock of it. And I didn't realize how much they would hate me. I mean, I used to have to, like meet somebody at a gas station a few blocks away from the arena and jump in their trunk and hide in a car and be driven into the arena because I couldn't bring my car there. They smashed the hell out of it. So I used to have to sneak in and out. And, it was, but back in those days too, it was the more they hated you, the more they, the bigger star you were in those days. So it was like the more they hated me, the better I felt because I knew I was doing a great job. And the interviews and the character change where people, and even as time went by in the mid 80s and later 80s when people were starting to smarten up, and I would still get in the ring and they'd be chanting Larry sucked and meant it, because no matter what they thought of wrestling, they believed I was in real life a true a-hole. I mean, they believed I really did suck. So which is a pat on my back, really. So I was, the more they hated me. And if you look back at the timing of the history of wrestling, because Bruno was retired when he came out and did the match with me. And that scenario with me and Bruno, when it finally ended and culminated in Shea Stadium, basically, if you look at the history of wrestling, it's a marker. It's a marker for the end of an era, the end of the era where the old school was changing. It was, those guys were getting too old and going away. And the era of the fans believing it was changing, and then the days of the territories were coming to an end because of nationwide cable springing out. So now the death of the territories happened, but the me and Bruno feud was kind of a marker of the end of one era, the days of when people believed and the territories thrived, but then the beginning of a new era, which became nationwide television and pay-per-view and now global network, so it's amazing when you think when wrestling came out of the circus, back in the 1800s and to where it is today, it's really amazing. And even though everybody's smart and the business is different, the money, I wish I made the money these guys are making today, because back then, if you made 100 grand, 150 grand, you were a super duper star making more than a pro football player.
Yeah.
But nowadays, you got some guys that don't even know how to put a boot on right, and they're millionaires because of contracts, but because merchandising and marketing and, all that stuff. So half of me wishes I missed the big money by about 20 years. The broadcasting was good because those 10 years is when the big money contracts came into play. And that kind of gave me a good 10 years of reaching a couple of new generations without getting beat up, because I was already a little over 40, but changed my persona a bit. And then everybody went from hating my guts to chanting my name every Nitro. And so it worked out great. I really had a blessed career, and things worked out good. And in almost a month, I'll be 70. And again, I feel lucky, feel like I'm 30, I don't even wear glasses.
I'm 32, and even I'm meant to wear glasses. So you're doing better than me.
Yeah,
honestly, a lot better than me.
Freaking nature or something, but but the body, thank God, health is great, and I don't need no artificial parts.
Do you think that side of wrestling is what's missing today, or that realness, the kayfabe still being alive, or do you think it's probably a good thing that it's gone away? Obviously, like I said, social media makes it difficult to stay in character anyway, because we see the real lives behind the characters.
Well, I think some of these guys, because they don't know the psychology, they hurt themselves by talking too much on social media, because the fans and wrestling fans, God, they're the greatest fans of all. I've seen the eras change. And as smart as they are, and as much as they don't want to know, they want to be able to go there and pretend and hate the bad guy and pop their cookies when the good guy beats the crap out of them. It's like going to Jurassic Park, when the dinosaur goes to eat the kid. People go, whoa, but the dinosaur is not real, but it's easy to pretend in. And what's missing today is the guys don't know how to make it easy to pretend in.
Yeah.
Every match is the same. But every match, everybody's doing the same stuff. And you got to run across the ring into a guy's foot, then you got to do 5 clotheslines, and then you're in there with a guy 300 pounds, so you slap him. Woo, give him a woo slap. That's going to stop a big, tough guy. So these guys, and then they get on social media and talk smart. And as soon as the fans know too much about you, they lose interest. Okay, that's good. Who's next? So these guys, really have to kind of wise up a bit, and the fans would be a lot better off, because they don't want to know what's going to happen. They don't want to know what's going on. They want to be able to get into suspense, and So I think it could be better.
Yeah, absolutely. No, fans are a strange bunch, because it's sort of a mix of, they say they want surprises, but then they'll go straight on the internet to find out spoilers.
What happened? Yeah, I know.
It's a hard thing to sort of balance. I see that a lot with fans. We, like you say, people get bored once they see too much of the real person, of the life behind the character. People get bored, and they want new, but when they get new, they get bored of the new very easily. So,
because the new don't know how to do it right to keep the people into them, But hopefully all eras change, and hopefully things are changing. And I know they're making some changes in the WWE.
Yeah.
Because, it's time for a new era too. And the business, I mean, they got big shows running like in Saudi Arabia and big pay-per-views, and they got to bring in 55-year-old Goldberg, or 50-some-year-old Undertaker, 50-year-old Edge, because they need new stars. And that's the situation they're in now, really, is they need to make new stars. And the fans are ready for new stars,
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll see what happens. And when this stupid flu's done, the Performance Center, where they, developmental for the WWE, is right down the road from my house, 5-6 miles.
All right.
And I used to go down there and stick my 2 cents in, and if I saw some guy that could do it. But the last year or so, I really didn't go down because it was too hard. You had to take tests and get shots. And so I've been waiting for things to get back to normal, and things are getting back to normal. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it'd be a great time for you to go down there, especially with the changes they've made to NXT now, with NXT 2.0, all of these new young guys who, a lot of them haven't had any exposure to wrestling. A lot of them aren't even independent wrestlers or college wrestlers or anything like that. There's a lot of like football players and athletes and people like that are being hired now. So if you were to go down there, you'd be probably the best person to give them advice.
Yeah, I'm probably, I don't want to blow smoke up my own butt, but I'm probably one of the last handful of guys still living from an old school era that knows things that people don't know anymore.
Yeah.
So, and I'd love to help some. So we're working on it. We'll see what happens. They've made some changes, like you said, at the PC and NXT, and it's right down the street. So we'll see what happens. I'll give it a shot. I know they've been doing a lot of releasing lately of some talent. I've been hearing a bunch of names the last few days. So they want to make some changes, and they know they need new stars too.
Yeah, some crazy names in there, but that's been talked about a lot. I don't want to get into the releases. It's all people seem to want to talk about at the minute. So you mentioned in there that you're one of the sort of the last guys still alive of that era, of that type of wrestler, that type of era. Another one of those wrestlers who is still around and still getting quite a bit of TV time, Arn Anderson, your former tag partner. So I'd love to know a bit about Arn, what he was like to work with, what he was like to tag with as well, because obviously that was at a time when you were a little bit older. Did you enjoy tagging with Arn in terms of like that period of your career? Do you feel like it maybe extended your career a little bit?
Well, no, it worked out good timing wise, because after the Bruno thing, and I stole them, became, the trademark, the living legend. But I was young, so it just made people hate me more. But when the territories ended and WCW called me to come down, I was like maybe 41, 42, and had a couple of knee surgeries, nothing bad, but some torn cartilage. So they teamed me up with Arn. And Arn was great. He was a great guy. He was a great guy to travel with. We had a great time together, and he was great in the ring. And the interesting thing was the fans bought it. When me and Arn walked out into the arena together, the place seemed like you went back 20 years, and the fans, instead of going boring, and then they went whoa, they really bought the team, and that kind of might have made my career go a little longer. In fact, the Enforcers, because they bought me and Arn so good the way they did, we could have gone on a little longer. And the interesting thing about that is when Bill Watts came in, because the TBS leadership would change every 6 months for a while, he had this different idea. He thought everybody over 40 should be leaving, and he was just going to push his kid Eric Watts. So they put a group together, the Dangerous Alliance. And I never liked being a tag team guy because I wanted, to be me. But the me and Arn thing was great. And at the time of my life, it was great. But the Dangerous Alliance, and they had great talent, stunning Steve Austin, became Steve, did a great job. And Bobby Eaton there, Rick Rude, Paul E. does a great job as an old school manager. He's easy to hate. But I didn't like the group. I didn't like the group thing. I didn't want to be part of a group. Because then you're only, and Watts, I don't want to deal with Watts. So I said to the TBS people, oh, my knee hurts. So I went back in and got another knee scope to clean out some torn cartilage. And I was home floating in a pool in Alpharetta, Georgia for about a month or so, rehabbing, after the little Mickey Mouse orthoscopic, knee cleaning. And I got a phone call from one of the producers at WCW that said to me, hey, Larry, can you do us a favor? Jesse, the Body Ventura, just quit. And we've got some television shows that we've taped. But can you come down to the office and do the voiceovers, like the color commentary on them with Shivani or JR, one of them. So I went, yeah, what the hell? And I was still getting paid, so I said, yeah, what the hell? So I went down and I did 2 or 3 shows. I voiced over. And after we were done, the door busted open. And this executive producer comes in and he goes, holy cow, he said, you're the best color guy we've ever heard. Would you like to, be a color commentator and do that for us? We'll give you this much a year. And that was the time when Turner was printing money and all the big contracts and all that. And I went, how much a year? I mean, I never thought of ever being a broadcaster. But at my age, now 42, and seeing what was happening with, the natural process of getting too old to be in the ring and the younger guys coming up. And then I was making more money doing the broadcasting than I ever did wrestling. And it worked 1 day a week. And then when the Nitro came, it was just, even better. So that's how the broadcasting started. I never planned it, but they gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, and that led to another 10-year, longer career of getting all good publicity, crowds chanting Larry, and me not getting beat up.
Win-win. Win-win situation.
Yeah, it was a win-win.
Win-win, and you got to sit down as well. Sit down and do your job. Nice, lovely. Sounds perfect. Sounds perfect. I'm glad you mentioned. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm glad that you mentioned the whole the commentary thing, because I wanted to ask about that, if it was ever something that you wanted to do, or because well, not a lot, but some wrestlers obviously transition into backstage roles, don't they, once they retire or get into commentary and things like that. But I had a feeling you hadn't retired, had you? You were still going, you were still active, because you wrestled after as well, didn't you? You've wrestled a few times since.
Oh, a few times. I mean, I could have kept wrestling, but it was just a perfect setup for that time, and the contract they offered me as an employee with all the benefits, and it was just too good of a deal to pass up. And then, but it was still in my blood. That's why, after maybe I think it was 2 or 3 years of broadcasting, I saw this guy come into WCW, young guy named Steve Regal. Lord William Regal from England. Yeah. And he was great. He would stand there and people would just love to hate him just because of the look he had, and we gave him a butler. But none of the guys, the newer guys coming up, knew how to wrestle, and Steve did. So I went, damn it. So I got in my blood. So that's why I had this idea and came up with and did a program with Regal where we had, a handful of matches and did a pay-per-view, and because he was good, and I was trying to show the guys too, because I was so sick. By 1995, I was so sick of broadcasting saying this one line: "What a clothesline!" I mean, the art of wrestling was getting lost already. And you had a bunch of bodybuilders in there, nuts that just didn't know much, and everybody was throwing clotheslines. I used to sit there with the pre-tape shows when we voiced them over, and I'd look at the card and I go, oh, the Nasty Boys. And again, okay, that's 10, 15 clotheslines in that match. And so before we saw the show, I set the over-under for how many clotheslines was going to be in this show, and every time I went, what a clothesline, I'd put a mark down, and I'd set the over-under 30 clotheslines, and guys would place bets, and sometimes on the TV show, you could hear me say, another clothesline, we hit the over, but you didn't know what I was talking about. And then I did it again a little bit with when the New World Order started. I kind of stuck my 2 cents in there, and wound up doing a Saving Nitro against Bischoff, and then Scott Hall and me, because I'm the one that set up the beginning of the New World Order.
Yeah. And
it just kind of worked out good, so I had to stick myself in it. And the people, anyway, I had a great career. I can't complain.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100% agree. I know you were a great commentator. I think most fans know you were a great commentator, and like you said, the executive burst through the door said that you were a great commentator.
Yeah.
There's one person who has made it clear they didn't think you were a great commentator, and I'm sure you've probably been asked about this before, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask, because I'm a huge Chris Jericho fan, but I know that he has rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way over the years, and to put it simply, to put it nicely, he annoys a lot of people, and I know he's had things to say about you in the past. He was critical about your commentary skills in WCW. Do you think that boiled down to the fact that you wouldn't let him use the Living Legend name?
Probably. It was probably something that stupid, because I was still, even though WCW just ended, I was still using the Living Legend to do independent wrestling shows and some TNA stuff when they started. And so I was still using the Living Legend. That was my trademark. And then he started using the Living Legend. So I kind of was talking to some WWE people. I was actually trying to maybe work something out where I'll come in and wrestle Jericho. He wants to be the Living Legend, But then it didn't work out, so I wound up kind of filing a lawsuit against him to make him shut up. So he probably said, what a crummy announcer he is, because it probably irritated him at the time. But,
how did that sour your relationship with WWE at all? Because obviously you went into the Hall of Fame in 2015, so Vince doesn't like to be sued, does he? So how did that go down with him?
Well, it really wasn't a big deal. We filed it, but then it was just kind of like a double knockout. Nothing happened. Okay, we won't use it. Okay, good. But there really wasn't much I could do. I could come in and do broadcasting. I was getting too old to wrestle, so it wasn't like, I don't know. There was no hard feelings against the WWE or anything like that. And then it worked out great, because we got Bruno, they actually, the WWE came to me and kind of asked me if I would get Bruno to get into the Hall of Fame, because they wanted him to do that for years, but he wouldn't do it. So I'm kind of the guy that got Bruno to go into the Hall of Fame. And Bruno's problem was, from the old school, you came from a time when your word was your contract. Yeah. And Bruno's thing was, well, I said I never would do it, so if I do it, people will think I'm a hypocrite. I said, Bruno, no one's going to think. I said, the fans that they want you to be in the Hall of Fame. You should be. They even made a statue of him. But then Bruno looked into the company seriously and talked to Dr. Maroon, one of the doctors for the WWE, and took care of the guys. And really, Bruno realized the WWE became a great company. They took care of the talent. They put their foot down to all drugs, all steroids. If some guy had a problem, they'd put him through rehab. If it took them 10 times, there's, the charity work they did with Make-A-Wish and other stuff. So Bruno realized, the WWE is a great company. And he realized that, and then he said, all right, I'll do it. So I got him to do it. And now I'm really back in the good graces of the WWE. And I was in the Hall of Fame, and that was a dream come true to have Bruno induct me. So everything, kind of went full circle. I started there, did the biggest angle they ever had there, in the WWF in that era. And then at the very end of my career and in the Bruno's days, I was back in the Hall of Fame with them. So it all came around. It was a happy ending and a dream come true. So
yeah, came full circle. Yeah. It's so nice. It's so nice to hear people who've been in the WWE and maybe had differences with Vince at times and differences with the system at times to actually say nice things about the company, because all you hear these days is so many criticisms and attacks on the company, but they do so much good. Like you said, Make-A-Wish, charity, all these kind of things, all the different foundations they've set up, Connor's Cure and all these kind of things.
Oh, and the jobs they provide. They got 150 or 80 offices in different countries. And not just wrestlers, you got truck drivers and lighting people and production people. It's a great company, and I'm glad the PC's right down the road. I've got a great relationship with them, so I can go in there anytime, and we'll see if we can make a couple new stars, because we got a new era. We got a new global era now. So, and with the social media, the wrestlers have to learn how to be smart, and you're going to be a character. You can't go on social media and not be a character and talk different and be you, because you'll just burn yourself out,
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. The next year or two is going to be a big year for WWE with NXT 2.0 and all that kind of stuff happening. We've mentioned Bruno quite a few times, and I think everybody knows about his accomplishments and his record-breaking longest title reign of all time. We know a lot about the wrestler and a lot about the things that he did. Obviously, you spent a lot of time with Bruno in the ring, I assume out of the ring as well. What was he like as just a man? What was he like as a friend and as a colleague and somebody that you spent time with outside of the ring?
He was really an old school guy. He was the nicest. Talk about, a straight shooting guy. He, his word was his contract. He didn't have to help me out, but he did. He was a great guy. And it's interesting you brought up a point about, sometimes guys have griefs with the company. And nowadays, usually, if they get released, they'll, badmouth the company. But they don't realize that they got released because they weren't drawing money. They weren't good. But in the old days, it was a little different because there was no contracts. So if you didn't, sell tickets, you didn't eat. It was a different pressure on the wrestlers and the promoters, because sometimes you have to fight for your money because the promoters could pay you what they want. There was no contracts, but if you didn't draw money, like even my idea, against Bruno was a great idea for me that I had for me to give me a big break. But when you look at the other side of the coin, Vince McMahon Sr., he was the guy that had to really put his hand in his wallet, pull out his checkbook, and pay for Shea Stadium in the Garden. So if my idea didn't work, he could have lost his butt. So it was a double-edged sword in the old days between the wrestlers and the promoters, sometimes arguing about money and things because you want it to be good for you, but the promoter's the one that's going to lose his house, not you. You'll go to some other territory. So it was a different game. The only thing now about, the guys did big contracts, so there's no incentive to really learn the trade and get better, because I go home and sit around and do nothing because I'm already making so much money, it don't matter. So it's almost to the point where they're getting, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't make the contract so big, so long, because it kills the ambition to learn more and be great, because you don't have to, you got a contract.
Yeah, and even when they get released, normally they've got like 60 days or 90 days no compete, but they get paid for that time. So they're getting paid for another 3 months to just sit at home.
Sit there. Yeah.
You know?
I know.
Crazy. I wish I could get paid to sit at home for 90 days.
Yeah, I mean, God bless them in the WWE. I mean, I get royalties. God bless them, you know. So, and we'll see what happens. I might weasel my way in. I just don't want to work a lot. I want to do something. I'd like to, you know, help make a couple new stars. But I don't want to, you know, grind every day and fly around every weekend. And I'm enjoying the golden years, Chris.
And so you should, after how much you've given to the business. That's something I wanted to come on to, actually, but I just wanted to quickly ask, because you mentioned Vince McMahon Sr. briefly there, and that's something I'm really interested in, because I've had loads of guests on the show, probably, I don't know, 50 to 70 guests, and everybody that I've spoken to hasn't really been from the era that you've been from. Nobody's really had experiences or dealings with Vince McMahon Sr. So what was he like? Because I've never really read anything about him. What was he like as a boss? Was he approachable?
Oh yeah, he was approachable and a very smooth character. I mean, if you watch movies from the 1930s and 40s and 50s, Vince McMahon Sr. was like the perfect promoter from an old movie. I mean, he'd be walking down the back of the garden and he'd have his cashmere long light brown jacket on. And he had this habit of always having like 4 or 5 quarters in his hand. And he'd like move them around a little bit. So you'd hear a little jingling and you know, oh, Vince is coming, you know. But he was a classy guy. I mean, the gray hair always looked good going back. And very approachable, because he was, you know, if someone had a good idea, he'd do it. If someone had a bad idea, you know, and he was smooth too, because he had agents like Gorilla Monsoon and Arnold Skolin. And, you know, so if some of the guys had a good idea, he'd do it. Some guys, you know, kept bugging him too much, and Vince knew that this is not a great idea. Vince was smooth, and Vince would say, you know what, that's a good idea. I'm going to go think about that. And then later that night, he'd go into one of the offices and see Gorilla Monsoon there and go, oh, Gorilla, fire that guy. So then, you know, so it wasn't Vince who was the bad guy. It was, you know, one of his agents, one of the middlemen. But that's the way the business had to go in those days, you know. But he was a very smooth character. And yeah, interesting. And it worked out great for me, because he believed in my dream enough to really put his butt on the line to pay for Shay in the garden. And I wasn't the stereotypical bad guy of those days. 300-pound George Steele, 300-pound Tanaka, you know, Killer Kowalski, Monsoon. So, you know, I was the 245-pound happy, you know, brand new young good guy. So, you know, it wasn't like what the business was about kind of in those days. But that all helped into the feud that no one saw coming.
Yeah. Sounds like Vince McMahon Sr. has passed on a little bit of that to Vince McMahon Jr. then, because Vince he uses people like Johnny Ace, John Laurinaitis, or Jim Ross over the years, isn't he, to do the hiring and firing. Vince doesn't really get too involved in that kind of things. What were the differences?
Vince is the guy that says what to do, but he ain't gonna do it.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. What were they? I don't know how to word this question. What were they like? Sort of like to deal with individually, like, who did you prefer to deal with, Vince McMahon Sr. or Vince McMahon Jr.? Were there many differences between the two of them? Was Vince very much like his father?
No, well, you know what? When I was there, you know, Vince McMahon Sr. was it, and Vince Jr. was there. I think he started maybe 2-3 years before I did, He was doing the broadcasting of the one-man show in those days. But he was quiet, really kind of the quiet guy, because his dad, and his dad had a couple of partners. And then I left the WWF after the big blow off with me and Bruno, because if I would have stayed there too long, I would have been going downhill with my career. But because my career was so hot and all the publicity came out of New York with the Wrestler and Wrestling Review, and that the other territories, the AWA and the NWA in Japan, they were all dying to have me come in because they needed a new bad guy for their heroes to wrestle, Yeah. So I left, and unfortunately, Vince Sr. passed away, and then Vince took over, but I never really worked for Vince, Jr. when he was doing what he did. And I tell you, what he did was amazing, because he talk about a gutsy guy, and the chances he took is basically, from the stories I hear, like WrestleMania 1. To get that going, he basically put his life on the line. He had mortgaged his house, his business, God knows what. If that would have bombed, Vince could have been homeless. But he created, professional wrestling, which was like, wasn't even talked about on the news, in those days. And he created it into like WrestleMania. It was bigger than the Super Bowl. It was amazing, amazing guy.
Yeah. He got celebrities involved. He got it into the mainstream media. What always makes me laugh is when people say, "Oh, he was handed the company by his father." No, he wasn't. He bought the company from his father. He
inherited basically kind of a mess, because there was two other partners involved too. And back in those days, the wrestling promoters had to pay the television stations to put the show on. It wasn't like later on down the road where the television networks and cable things gave you millions of dollars to put your show on. So what really he inherited wasn't a cup of tea. It was, like I said, he put everything on the line and had his dream of making WrestleMania, and it became what it is now. The Super Bowl of wrestling. Amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. You've got to, as much as people may not like Vince, you have to respect what he's done, respect his hustle, respect his, his vision. Another thing I wanted to speak about, we've spoken about loads of legends, and you've said some incredible names in there: Killer Kowalski, Bobby Eaton, all these legends, these icons and heroes. There's one other that I'm really keen to ask you about. Now, I was born in '89. So when I got into wrestling, it was obviously a very different era to the one that you were a big part of. But as a wrestling fan, I've gone back. I've watched loads of stuff. I've watched loads of your stuff. I've watched loads of Bruno stuff. And before interviewing you today, I did little bits of research. And the one name that I didn't really see come up was Ric Flair. Now, obviously, Ric Flair, one of the greatest of all time. A lot of people will say he was the greatest of all time. But I couldn't really find much about any interactions that you had with him. But I don't think you ever wrestled, did you? Is there a reason that you didn't wrestle?
We never wrestled, me and Flair. And it was interesting. Well, here's the story, because it was supposed to happen, and it's an interesting story. Because in 1985, I was in the AWA. And Flair was in the NWA, on TBS with the Crockett's. And Vince was way ahead of both those organizations. Territories were trying to hang on, but it was over. And, with the pay-per-views and the cable nationwide. So the Crockett's and the Gagnes were working together a little bit. They ran Meadowlands. They ran some big shows together to try to compete with the WWF. I don't know if it was the WWE yet, but that. And the merchandising started coming out, I think, 84 or so, because my first action figure came out, I think, 84, 85. And if you look at it, it's the AWA collection. And all the AWA collections had AWA wrestlers in them. But my doll had a doll of me and a doll of Flair, an action figure. And Flair wasn't in the AWA. He was in the NWA. And what was going on was kind of interesting, but I'll say it. They were putting together kind of a scenario of an invasion thing where the NWA was going to wrestle the AWA guys. And I was supposed to be having matches with Flair. I even did a couple interviews one day in Minneapolis for ESPN when we were on ESPN, you know, calling Flair out and challenging him because I'm the living legend. I retired Bruno, I retired Bockwinkel. And that was on ESPN. And then Flair was going to come back and badmouth me on TBS, saying he was the nature boy, he's the greatest, you know, the man gimmick. So, and then one show, someone would invade the other group at one of their shows. But at the last minute, the Crockett's and the Gagnes, it fell apart. It didn't happen. You know, Verne finally shut the door, was losing too much money. And the Crockett's mother was the one who controlled the purse strings. And she shut down the NWA, but sold it to Turner, who was a big fan who wanted the TV. So ESPN dropped the AWA, but TBS, you know, was the beginning of WCW. But the doll was, you know, already made up because me and Flair were supposed to have big matches against each other. That's why we came in the same pack. And the interesting thing is about that thing is that was the exact same idea when Eric Bischoff and Greg Gagne were in the office of WCW. That invasion idea, the same one we were supposed to do with me and Flair starting it, was what became the New World Order, where we had Scott Hall and Kevin Nash invade WCW first and made it look like the WWE guys were invading the WCW guys. That's where the idea might have came from. But that's why me and Flair are in the same pack, but we never wrestled each other. It would have been a great match too. I mean, I was looking forward to it. It would have been great, but it just never happened.
Very interesting. I bet those figures are rare now. I bet they're worth a lot of money.
You know, it's weird because I'll do conventions and signings, and people still have them dolls and they're unopened, you know. And I know if I've seen something that, you know, Flair signed, and if you got one with Flair signing his doll and me signing my doll and the unopened, probably worth a bunch.
Yeah.
You know.
Easily.
And then that's the situation that became the New World Order, which became the hottest thing ever.
Yep.
But it was supposed to happen with me and Flair 10 years earlier.
Very interesting. Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. Especially as like you said, the NWO was the biggest thing that had ever happened in wrestling. It changed the industry, didn't it? So maybe if it had happened with you guys, would it have still happened?
And that was at a time when we were talking earlier how all the fans kind of knew everything, and Meltzer and them had the dirt sheets out. But it didn't matter because the NWO took them back 20 years and people were diving over the barricades trying to punch out Bischoff and the other guys. You know, I mean, the ratings were doing like an 11. It was amazing. I don't know if wrestling's ever going to be that hot again. But when you look at that and then you look at today, and you know, that's why I still believe if you make some stars and put a little psychology back, the fans will get emotionally involved because they don't want to be smart. They don't want to know. They want to go into, they want to pretend, they want to have a great time. They want to be swerved, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I miss the mystery, miss the surprise, miss all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you don't want to know who the murderer is before you see the movie.
No. Yeah, that's a good analogy. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, really good way. I wanted to ask you one more thing, and this is really, really recent, bringing it all the way back up to sort of like recent times, modern day. The most recent match that I could find that you wrestled was 2015, so only 6 years ago. I don't know if those records are correct, if you've done anything since then, but you were 63 at the time. That's a hell of an age to still be wrestling, even if you weren't taking many bumps. That's still a hell of an age to still be wrestling. I know you were working in TNA in 2006, and you did some independent stuff for a few years after that. Do you miss being in the ring? I always wonder this. Once people retire for good, do you miss it, or is it, especially when you've done it for so many years?
Yeah, I don't miss it at all now. I mean, okay. It's just too dumb. I mean, for me to get in the ring and do anything that people, be worth watching, the odds of me, winding up in the emergency room are pretty good. And so, I mean, I've been lucky, and I did do some matches when I was, even my early 60s, but I did them because I was lucky. I didn't have any injuries, But now, I mean, skeleton's pretty good, a little stiff sometimes, but no more. But yeah, I mean, and even Bruno told me years ago, I mean, it just becomes a time when athletes get too old, to do it. You don't see 50-year-old football players or basketball players, The body is a limited offer.
Like I said earlier, man, you've made the most of yours. A legendary career over 4 decades, maybe 5 decades into your
I started 73, 83, 93, 2003, 2013, 2023, getting close to 50 years.
Close to 50 years. Crazy. And like you say, still fighting fit and healthy, still wanting to be involved and still wanting to do something. It's very rare that you find people like yourself.
Why don't I be too bored? I mean, I enjoy like chilling out, but then I'd really enjoy passing some knowledge down too, and I'd enjoy getting the psychology, and so the fans could have more fun.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens.
Yeah, man, absolutely. No, it'd be wonderful to see you back involved. I'd love to see. I'm sure anybody watching or listening to this would love to see it. Larry, it's been an absolute pleasure. I genuinely, I started doing this podcast about a year ago. Started talking to some smaller names and some independent names, and I cannot believe that I've just sat down and spoken to you for the best part of an hour. It's absolutely incredible.
It's an hour. I'm going to charge you double. What the hell?
It went really quick. It flew by as well. 45 minutes. But no, honestly, it blows my mind that I've just spoken to you, living legend, an absolute hero and an icon. Before I let you go, is there anything that you've got coming up soon? Any signings, any conventions, anything like that where people can find you at?
You know what? I don't have anything in terms of conventions or signings coming up. Some guy called me that I might wind up hosting a show that is about old wrestling from like the 50s, 60s, and not cool. Voicing over, but hosting a show kind of thing. And that might happen. And I did a movie. End of 2019, we filmed a movie a couple of months here in Florida. And I was in like the whole movie. It's called The Replaceable. But the name might change when the distributor. It's almost done. It's been getting edited in special effects. It's about a group of wrestlers going on the road, and they wind up in a town, and then they wind up saving the town from aliens. But it was really well done. I mean, nothing dirty. The whole family can watch it. It's a cleverly done movie. I mean, it wasn't a big budget thing, but it wasn't a small budget thing either. And we'll see what happens. It should be out, but you can Google, Replaceables the movie, and find out some stuff about it. It should be close to being all done soon, hopefully before Christmas or. So they're finishing up the editing.
Wrestlers go to a small town and save it from aliens. If that's your favorite type of movie, if that's your favorite genre, wrestling, alien, I don't know. Any drama?
I didn't write it, but it was well done. So,
well, it sounds
happens.
interesting. It sounds interesting. I will. As soon as we finish this, I will Google it and see what on earth that is all about because it sounds crazy.
Yeah, see what pops up. The replaceables. Yeah.
The replaceables. Make sure everybody, I'm going to put it in the description as well. Everybody Google the replaceables. Make sure you do. Larry, like I said, man, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed listening to me talking to the living legend, Larry Zbyszko. If you did, like I said at the start, please hit subscribe or follow wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening. I have been your host, Chris Dees, and I will look forward to seeing you next time on It's My Wrestling Podcast.
All right, well, thank you, Chris. It's been my pleasure. And everybody, love you. I hope all your dreams come true, too.
Thank you, Larry.